Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And again, you can also tune in Friday nights, 11 to 1 a.m., where it's rebroadcast on a bunch of other networks. Well, today it's going to be me again, going solo, so I guess sit back and maybe take out your notebook because there's going to be a lot of information. And we're going to do kind of a sort of like an update episode. Last week we of course talked about Roger Stone, and that episode got great feedback. So thank you everybody who enjoyed that episode. And of course a big chunk of that episode was spent talking about Al Sharpton, the famous Reverend civil rights activist, MSNBC host, and kind of quite a few emails and comments, people wanting to kind of, I mentioned, of course, that Al Sharpton was an FBI informant in that episode, and I linked up to the Smoking Gun article, and I'll put that in the chat room right now, anybody that's interested in kind of following along with that. It's a really great article by William Bastone and a few other writers over at the Smoking Gun. And as I said last week, we talked a lot about the sort of constant reinvention of characters such as Roger Stone, but also a little bit with Al Sharpton. And right now we have the svelte, wealthy Al Sharpton, who was, as I said, a MSNBC commentator. He's, kind of dangerously thin. He looks sort of like a bobblehead figure of himself right now. And he is the liberal crusader, of course, dressed in bespoke suits, very expensive suits. And that is a very different image of the Al Sharpton of the 1980s, who, along with the, tracksuits and the big gold chains, who's very heavy, long kind of hair, and again, very, sort of a loud, very media savvy, so-called civil rights activist. But he was also known by the government as CI7, Confidential Informant 7. And this started sometime in the early 1980s. And we'll get into that a little bit later, the actual time when Al Sharpton was flipped by the FBI. Now, the general consensus is that this was in 1983, and again, we're going to get into how that all started. And he was basically flipped by what was now called the Genovese Squad, and this was a joint operation by the FBI and the NYPD that was targeting the Genovese crime family, which was the largest and most powerful mafia crime family in America. And like all confidential informants, Al Sharpton, gathered information. So he was never going to testify in court, and it was never supposed to be revealed that he was CI7. Now, the Smoking Gun, and this is several years back now. I'll pull up the article, which I probably should have had out earlier. This is April 7th, 2014. William Bastone, Andrew Goldberg, and Joseph Giselli wrote this excellent article, very long, Al Sharpton's secret work as an FBI informant. And I'm basically kind of just ripping off the Smoking Gun here. So, shout out to the Smoking Gun, and of course to Ed Opperman, who first sort of opened my eyes up to Al Sharpton as a confidential informant. And we'll get into a little bit about what Ed has to say on this. But the Smoking Gun, through FOIA requests with the government, as well as interviews with various members of the Genovese Squad, other law enforcement, court documents, and also some interviews with some of Al Sharpton's more nefarious friends that are in prison, they put together this very comprehensive article outlining Al Sharpton as a CI. Now, we'll get into the specifics of how this all happened, but just as sort of a general overview, Sharpton was flipped at some point, according to The Smoking Gun and others. This was in 1983 during an FBI sting, and after providing a lot of information on his associates in the Mafia as well as in the music industry, Sharpton was, then sent back, and he famously carried around a customized Hartman briefcase, which was outfitted with a recording device. And Sharpton's information would allow the feds to bug 2 Genovese social clubs, one of which was owned by the boss, Vincent Gigante, who was a very famous crime boss. He was famous for feigning mental illness, which is a plot line in The Sopranos, of course, with Uncle June. And there's actually, as I was going through this article and doing research, there's quite a few Soprano connections to this that I'll point out as we get on. But along with the social clubs, of course, Gigante's in Greenwich Village, 3 cars that were used by family leaders, over a dozen phone lines. All these wiretaps were approved during this major racketeering investigation against the Genovese family, and to a lesser extent also the Gambino crime family as well. Excuse me. And 8 separate U.S. District Court judges in 4 federal jurisdictions signed the orders that were based on FBI affidavits, many of which were provided by Al Sharpton himself. Now, I guess it's important to note, just sort of straight off the bat, that Al Sharpton vehemently denies his history as an FBI informant. Now, he claims that these are mostly smears that were meant to sully his name, and sort of, sway the influence that he had as a civil rights leader. In 2013, Sharpton wrote a book called The Rejected Stone, where he claims that he was actually set up by the government, and then that the agents leaked false information that, quote, could have gotten me killed. Now, he told The Smoking Gun that his cooperation with the FBI was limited to investigations of drug dealing in minority communities and ripping off black artists in the recording industry, which is something that Sharpton has always sort of maintained. That's the extent of his work with the government. We'll get into that a little bit later. Now, he's also denied, of course, being flipped during an undercover operation. When he was asked about this, he was asked about recording of a particular Gambino crime family member, Joseph Pagano, which we'll get into a little bit later. He said, quote, "I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no." That's what he told The Smoking Gun. And of course, Sharpton has always played the hero card, that this was he was doing all of this for altruistic, motivations, that he wasn't terrified of going to jail, that he wasn't trying to save his skin, and that really, what he wanted to do was help get drugs out of the black community and help a lot of black recording artists who were legitimately being ripped off by figures such as Morris Levy, who's a very powerful mafia earner, who we'll get into later, and as well as others, we'll get into that. Various mafioso figures. He's now sort of reinvented himself as the trusted White House advisor. He's the national black activist leader that Obama goes to. That's his, and he's been to the White House several times. He's obviously now made himself into this liberal crusader. Of course, not paying any attention to his work with Roger Stone, with other conservative leaders, or his work as an FBI informant. And it's important, too, that 60 Minutes did a very big profile of Al Sharpton back in 2011. And this very much kind of framed in people's minds Al Sharpton. The profile was very much about his reinvention, again, as this liberal crusader. He distanced himself from some of the racist, homophobic things that he was known to say in the past. And Leslie Stahl, who was the journalist involved in this, said that there were allegations of mob ties, never proved. And that was sort of the end of that. There were these rumors that had sort of surfaced, and Some of this sort of dates back to a 1988 Newsday report that would say that Sharpton had cooperated with federal investigations against Don King and some organized crime figures. And it was during this time in the late 80s that there was a phone installed in his Brooklyn office in 1987 that was a hotline that went, straight to the I believe this was the FBI, and that this was there so that Al Sharpton could report on drug dealing. And this was set up by his former FBI handler, Joseph Spinelli, who would also shop Al Sharpton around because of his knowledge of the Mafia. Now, this is I think that is true. He did have this hotline phone, but his sort of pronouncements that that's all it was is kind of a joke, is clearly demonstrated in the Smoking Gun article, which has a lot of great links to all of the documents. So the FBI affidavits, transcripts of some of the wiretaps, all of this sort of stuff. But I guess we'll go. Let's go to how this all sort of started, because that's really important understanding this. Now, for right now, we're just going to go with what the Smoking Gun has reported. And then later on, we're going to kind of talk about the exact, there's some discrepancies about when Al Sharpton was actually flipped. But let's go back to how the sort of general story of how this happened. So as I said, there's Joseph Spinelli and his partner John Pritchard were involved in some FBI operations. And at one point, they actually got Sharpton secretly recorded with an undercover FBI agent who was posing as a wealthy drug dealer that was trying to get into boxing promotion. So again, we have this connection. Don King, of course, a very famous boxing promoter, who manipulated Mike Tyson and a lot of others, very close with Donald Trump, very close with mafioso. So they saw that this might have been a way to get in. Now, people may be familiar with with this video. There's of course, Brian Gumbel on HBO Sports, played parts of this video, and you can see Al Sharpton with the cowboy hat on, and he's talking with this undercover FBI agent. Now, during one of these conversations, the undercover agent offers to get Sharpton pure coke, 99% pure coke, that he can sell at $35,000 a kilo. Sharpton then nods his head and says, "I hear you." Now, the agent then promised Sharpton a 10% finder's fee if he could arrange a buyer for the coke. Sharpton says that he has he knows of a buyer, and he says, quote, "If he's going to do it, he'll do it much more than that." And this was also believed, or there's some consensus that they were also trying to target a Genovese soldier by the name of Daniel Pagano. And he was a Sharpton acquaintance, and he was a longtime heroin trafficker. So, there's sort of an in there. Now, while Sharpton never explicitly arranged a deal, and, according to a lot of experts actually watching the tape, it's sort of a bit of a stretch in terms of getting, dirt on him. He never says, give me the coke, and I'll sell it for you, or I'll find a buyer for you. He never really officially says that. Yet, when they approach Sharpton with this tape and this stuff, he ends up actually flipping. And this again, this FBI files. This is all, there's really no sort of denying this, no matter what the Rev Al will say. Now Sharpton maintains that when the FBI approached him, that he stood up to them, he dared them to indict and prosecute them. He said that this was entrapment, blah blah blah, and that the FBI left. Of course, he never warned his friend Pagano that there was a fake drug dealer who was an FBI agent, and the FBI would then open a 137 informant file on Al Sharpton. Now, the FBI was interested in Sharpton for a variety of reasons. As I said, he was very good friends with Don King. And he also had quite a few music connections at that point. Now, particularly James Brown, who Sharpton said was his mentor, and he emulated his style quite a bit with the flashy clothing, jewelry, long hair, cowboy hats, all that sort of stuff. Now, Sharpton had first met and became close with James Brown in the mid-1970s, and it was through Brown that Sharpton would eventually meet a lot of these mafioso and mafia figures. Now, Sharpton actually worked for Spring Records, which was a small record label in Manhattan that was owned by James Brown. And at the time, at Spring Records, there was a Colombo crime family capo, or captain, Michael Franzese, who was also, along with Joseph Bonanno, very famous, who was a Gambino figure, both of which were deeply involved in record production and distribution. The mob used to own a lot of R&B, disco record companies. They were, people will be familiar with payola and stuff like that in terms of getting records played. So he meets Franzese and Bonanno at this point, and it's through these connections that Sharpton was actually involved in a scheme with another Genovese capo by the name of Matty the Horse Ianniello. And they were going to create a sort of front business. They were going to buy up shares in this Con Edison program that was going to offer subsidized electricity to minority businesses. Con Ed eventually shut it down when they figured out what was going on. And the investigation against Ianniello and his business partner, who's called Benjamin Cohen, who worked across the hall from Sharpton at Spring Records and recruited him. They were investigated, and so already now, and this is the late 70s, we start to see that Sharpton is sort of becoming very familiar with some very powerful mafia figures, Bonanno in particular, very powerful guy, and he was involved in some sort of a scheme. Now, Sharpton writes in his first book that the music industry is, quote, is an extremely dirty endeavor because it is a cash business. Music is a street business, and that's where organized crime is, on the street. And it didn't really bother him, and in his book he says that he wanted to learn more about this. So, just to, kind of fill this out right now, we have this guy, Al Sharpton. We have him working at a record label, which is who has a lot of connections to the mafia. We have him involved in some sort of mafia scheme, tricking Con Ed, and we also have him back in 1983, at least, being caught on tape in a coke deal, and at which point he is essentially flipped. Now, a little bit of background. Again, in terms of, Sharpton wanting to get deeper into the music industry. One of Sharpton's mentors in this endeavor was music producer and famed heroin trafficker, Robert Curington. And Curington was an R&B promoter along with legendary radio DJ Frankie Crocker. And they were involved in, again, promoting a lot of very famous R&B singers throughout the 60s and 70s. Now, Curington was caught and acquitted in 1975 on heroin trafficking charges, and then he was then later caught in a 1977 DEA sting. And I believe he at that point pleaded out. He pleaded to having large quantities of mannite, which is a substance which is used to cut heroin. Now, Curington also had a desk job at Cala Records, which was headed by Morris Levy's bodyguard and right-hand man, Nate McCalla. Again, Morris Levy, very well-known record producer. He is actually the inspiration for Hesh in The Sopranos, who is a record producer. And we'll get into some of Morris Levy's, sort of claim to fame later. But this guy, Nate McCalla at McCalla Records, was also connected to Michael Franzese, who again worked or was associated with Spring Records. And his father, of course, John, was a Colombo crime family underboss. So Curington was very much acquainted with this world. He understood this world. He, floated in this world. And interestingly, he also dated Sylvia Rhone, who's a very influential female music executive. She headed Elektra Entertainment Group, Universal Motown Records. I think she is still the head of Epic Records, which represents Michael Jackson, Prince, Outkast, Ozzy Osbourne, a lot of stuff. And Sharpton worked under Curington, threatening labels and concert promoters with boycotts and protests unless they put more into the black community and into black artists. And this is a big cornerstone of Al Sharpton's claims of being this crusader for the black community. He was very big about exposing corruption. And, again, Morris Levy was very famous for basically claiming ownership and claiming songwriting credits on songs that he never wrote, and basically ripped off countless careers of mostly young black R&B artists, which again is a major plot line of an episode in I think it's the first season of The Sopranos, where Hesh is essentially he's going to get sued by this rap artist who's claiming that he ripped off all these people. Morris Levy, he ran Roulette Records, a bunch of other record companies. We'll get to a little bit of that later. So Sharpton was well known for threatening these labels and concert promoters. And basically, when he would shake them down, they would then have to give a contribution to his group, the National Youth Movement, which was the predecessor of the National Action Network, which again we spoke about in the Roger Stone episode. Now, Curington, who's again the very nasty character, heroin dealer, mafia associate, and himself was, ripping off a lot of people. He was actually the vice president of industrial affairs for the National Youth Movement. So again, just to kind of bring everyone up to speed, because I know I'm going to kind of throw a lot of information out there. One of Sharpton's mentors is, again, this guy, Robert Curington. Again, lots of mafia ties and drug ties as well. That's another major sort of thing to keep in mind throughout this episode. Because again, Sharpton's other cornerstone, along with supposedly wanting to better the black community and black artists, is stopping the flow of drugs into black communities. Now, let's not kid ourselves with what we have so far. We're talking about a small group of Italian and black criminal elites like Bonanno and Curington and Morris Levy, who are essentially profiting off of almost predominantly black and Hispanic artists in terms of controlling the record labels, in terms of controlling their contracts, copyright, all that kind of stuff. While at the same time they are flooding almost exclusively, predominantly, and black and Hispanic neighborhoods with heroin. Curington, very involved in this. Bonanno goes back to heroin trafficking, was how he kind of got his start. So, if this seems, like a contradiction or a bit odd, it's because it is. These are the people that the crusader, Al Sharpton, is associating himself with. The very same people who control the music industry, who rip off black artists, and at the same time, they are also selling black artists drugs, and they are selling drugs to the communities where the black artists are from. So keep that in mind, because that's an important kind of factor that's going to kind of come up again and again, and also goes just sort of towards exposing how shady and corrupt Al Sharpton really is. Now back to his informant days and his knowledge of and connection to Pagano. This was very big with the FBI. Pagano purportedly controlled Sammy Davis Jr.'s music career and his contracts. He was involved in a kickback scheme with Columbia Records. He had once been offered the ownership of the Sands Hotel in Vegas. And he was also close to Rodney Dangerfield, who, I think everyone should know who Rodney Dangerfield is, very famous comedian. He's in Groundhog's Day. And Dangerfield himself was performed at Pagano's son and daughter's wedding. And Dangerfield himself is a sort of mafia associate in many ways. He was arrested also by the FBI back in 1955 after fraudulently securing Federal Housing Administration loans. He was like a door-to-door salesman. He sold aluminum siding and was basically taking out all of these housing administration loans in his clients' names. Now, so Pagano was a big figure, and the FBI believed that through Pagano they could get to a lot of these other figures and possibly all the way up the top to Vincent Gigante and the head of the Genovese crime family. And the FBI was also interested in psychological. They were very interested in these rumors that Pagano was gay, that he had some sort of, the Smoking Gun says that he turned gay while he was in Sing Sing prison. FBI was very interested in exploiting that. And Al Sharpton, who at this point was in the sort of informational phase. He was giving information to the FBI. He was explaining his connections. Sharpton told the FBI that Pagano was indebted to him after he brokered a business deal between Pagano and the recently retired Muhammad Ali. So Sharpton is giving them all this information, and presumably he's giving them information on Curington, on Bonanno, on all of these figures that he has met now through the music industry and through boxing promotion and other stuff. So soon thereafter, Sharpton goes from an informational to an operational informant. So this means now that they're done sort of debriefing Al Sharpton on what he knows, and now they want to kind of send him out there, see what information he can get. And again, the Genovese squad, this FBI NYPD joint operation, they soon turned their eyes to Vincent Chin Gigante. Now, they wanted to gather, essentially what they wanted to do is they wanted to gather enough information to get a wire. And Sharpton was an important role or important part in this puzzle in terms of getting that information. Now, the Genovese squad was also, again, as I said, interested in Morris Levy, who, I'll give a little bit of background. He founded the Birdland Jazz Club, Roulette Records. As I said, he stole songwriting credits from R&B artists. He also, interestingly, held a large stake in Sugar Hill Records, which was a rap label owned by Curtis Blow, which represented the Sugar Hill Gang and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And we'll get to there's another Sugar Hill Records connection. So they were interested in these figures who, again, were very powerful and very, very wealthy. The record business, drugs, all this stuff that had made the Genovese and Morris Levy and others extremely wealthy. So the FBI and the NYPD, they begin to develop dossiers on many of Sharpton's mob associates. Now, initially, they would focus on Joseph Bonanno, who Pagano claims he introduced Al Sharpton and the two of them together. He formally introduced Sharpton to Bonanno. Now, Curington claims that he did it, but I think it's sort of irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. But after about 2 months into this research on Bonanno and the connections, they actually send Al Sharpton in. And he has an initial meeting between the two of them, set up by either Curington or Pagano. And it's sort of uneventful. And again, it's recorded. Sharpton goes in with his briefcase and records it, and it's sort of uneventful. But, excuse me, I am just gassy today. After that, there are several more meetings and conversations. And they get pretty juicy, after a while. And Bonanno would actually open up quite a bit to Al Sharpton. And this is something that, FBI agents, mafia officials, media personalities, all these people will say that for all of Al Sharpton's sort of blowhard rhetoric and, his image is sort of, yelling and whatever, he's quite personable. He opens up well to people. He knows how to talk to people, all different walks of life. And he's actually, he can kind of, convince you or put you into a feeling of safety or whatnot, and you begin to talk. Now, Bonanno would start talking about all sorts of things. He would talk about his rocky relationship with Morris Levy. And at one point, Levy accused Bonanno's brother of stealing from the record company, and he even ordered a killing. He ordered a hit on Bonanno's brother, and I don't want to get too off track, but that caused like a whole sort of hubbub within the mafia underworld, and because you're talking about all these different families and ordering hits on people, and they had to have like a mafia sort of summit and sit down, and eventually nobody was killed. He also spoke very candidly about Levy's association with Gigante. Now, this is huge for them, again, because they are essentially trying to build this case to bring down the Genovese crime family. So over the course of several months, Al Sharpton and Bonanno would meet about 8 more times. And again, talking about Pagano Bonanno at one point talked about Joseph Pagano's attempts to kill Levy. He talked about Levy's attempts to cut off ties with the Genovese crime family. And he told Sharpton there's only one way out, and then gesturing with a gun and pulling the trigger. And he also spoke about his mentor, Carlo Gambino. He talked about loan sharking. He talked about numbers runners. He talked about a proposed African diamond deal. And he also even talked about Vincent the Chin, Gigante's alleged illiteracy. Now, I guess we should also just sort of pause, because I don't know how familiar people are with the Mafia in New York and whatnot, but this was a huge no-no. Even if Sharpton wasn't an FBI informant, Gigante was so paranoid about getting caught, about wiretaps, about informants, about all this sort of stuff, that nobody was really supposed to be talking about any of the kind of specifics. This is how our loan sharking operation works. This is how we run numbers in, Harlem and other places. They weren't even supposed to actually mention Gigante's name in public. If you were having a conversation with somebody and you wanted to refer to him, you were supposed to just rub your chin, where he gets his nickname. So the fact that Bonanno is just sort of spilling the beans here is huge. This is especially for someone as high up as he was. He was very high up. He was a captain or a capo within the Gambino crime family. He should have never really been talking about this stuff, let alone with an FBI informant. But of course, he didn't know. Now, the NYPD told the Smoking Gun, the NYPD that were involved in the Genovese squad, they recalled that Sharpton's recordings provided massive insight into how Gigante and Morris operated. And again, this was a very involved operation. Al Sharpton wasn't just some, he wasn't like a two-bit criminal who got, caught with some weed or crack or something like that, and they flipped him and he gives them a little bit of information. Sharpton is prepped in advance. He is always handed the briefcase. He's not walking around with his briefcase. So when he goes to, say, meet Bonanno at a restaurant in Manhattan, he's prepped in advance. Then he arrives at the location and then, goes, say, several blocks away, gets into a car with the FBI agents. They hand him the briefcase. He goes, has the conversation, and then he is debriefed afterwards. So not only are they taking what he recorded, but they're taking, his perspective. I'm sure they're asking him things about body language. What was the mood like? Any little things here and there. I'm sure they would, and then again, these recordings they're listened to, they're transcribed, they're filed. This is a big operation. Sharpton isn't, he's not like an informant at like a local police department. He's now he's an FBI informant. This is a huge thing. And at this point now, they're really starting to sort of understand the intricacies of how the Genovese family works, how Morris Levy works, how the Gambinos work, and they're beginning to put together a pretty serious case. Now, amongst all of this, in the midst of all of this, and this time when Sharpton is, very busy recording Bonanno conversations, he's also pushing very hard to have a role in Michael Jackson's upcoming Victory Tour with his brothers. And Don King was actually involved in the promotion of the tour in the U.S. and Canada, and I think it was like a 75-city tour. Very big, the Victory Tour. And Al Sharpton, true to form, starts threatening boycotts, saying that Michael Jackson hadn't given enough back to the black community, that he hadn't given enough back to black artists, and he's threatening boycotts and protests and going to make a lot of publicity for Michael Jackson that he doesn't want. So Sharpton is then named the head of Michael Jackson's Pride Patrol, which is this community outreach program that is sort of slapped together at the last minute by Sharpton and a few others. And in Sharpton's autobiography, he states that he was given a budget of $500,000 to distribute free tickets. And he also claimed that he gave out donations in poor communities, that he hired lots of poor kids and out-of-work guys to work security in some of the states. And of course, all of these allegations of extortion against Michael Jackson and ticket scalping start to emerge. And of course, the Honorable Al Sharpton denies all of this, despite the fact that, he did sort of, to use Mafia parlance, shake down Michael Jackson. And I'm sure that he was, scalping tickets and whatnot. And it should also be noted that during this time, Al Sharpton is not really getting all that much money from the FBI. He's getting walking around money. They're not paying him the way they do now. Now if you're an FBI informant, there are a lot of FBI informants that basically make a living out of being an informant because you can get paid so well. And there's a New Yorker article all about a couple of FBI informants who are involved in all these big terrorism cases, and they basically make a living out of being informants. So it's presumable that Sharpton was trying to siphon off money, and he was actually so broke that he actually had to ask Bonanno for money so that he could travel with Michael Jackson. Now, interesting to note also, Sharpton became so kind of close with the Victory Tour that the FBI got really freaked out when Michael Jackson was invited to meet Ronald Reagan at the White House, because now they have possibly a undercover, FBI informant, possibly, with recording devices walking around the White House, and they didn't want to inform the White House of his status, or they couldn't, so they freaked out, and eventually he never actually visited the White House. And who knows, that might have been a favor, that might have been Michael Jackson saying, I don't want him there. But either way, that was going on. Now, Robert Curington believes that Bonanno was actually interested in getting involved in the Victory Tour, and that's why he was sort of helping Al Sharpton out. And he also thought, Bonanno also thought that Al Sharpton could get a particular artist signed to a particular label. That's how Curington kind of describes this. And important to note that, Al Sharpton's music mentor, Robert Curington, the heroin trafficking, mobbed-up record producer, had a very low opinion of Al Sharpton and was constantly making fun of him behind his back, and still to this day thinks that he's like an asshole. So, again, the great liberal crusader was not well liked by some very nasty people. So I think that should kind of give you an idea of what kind of person Al Sharpton really is. Now, at this point, Sharpton is gathering a lot of information. And, of course, then that information leads to other leads, that leads to other possible informants. And there's now a slew of evidence that the Genovese squad has. And with this evidence, they were then able to actually go about and start wiretapping. So they tap a Genovese Capo car, and this belongs to Dominic Cantorino. They tap, and that in and of itself is like ridiculous. It's just sort of like a side note. But it took them like 3 tries to actually bug Cantorino's car. At one point, I think the first time that they were trying to bug it, this hotshot young FBI agent, goes in and he breaks into the car and he puts the wires and everything and hides them and then he leaves and he radios to his fellow FBI agents and he's like, mission accomplished. And they say, no, you were made, Cantorino is staring at you through the window. So, but they were eventually able to bug his car. I think it was a 3rd time. They also, bugged Morris Levy's Manhattan office and his farm. And they, bugged the phone lines there. They also bugged, Vincent Gigante's mistress's Upper East Side townhouse. They bugged, I think it was 2 or 3 phone lines in that house. Now, through these wiretaps and Sharpton affidavits, they would sort of bring down Levy and Cantorino. I think Cantorino ended up going to jail for something like 20 years. Morris Levy got very sick towards the end of his life, and he died before he would see the inside of a prison cell. But several other high-profile mafia soldiers and captains would also be brought down by these wiretaps and affidavits provided by Al Sharpton. Now, while this was going on, there was actually a separate case against Joseph and Daniel Pagano. Again, these are other very good friends and mafia associates of Al Sharpton. And there was a case that was going on at the time that the New York Attorney General office was going after, and it was like their organized crime unit. They were looking into to the Paganos, and they actually cited Al Sharpton as an informant who, on their letters to get wiretaps. They cite Al Sharpton as the informant who told them that business is conducted in their homes, and Sharpton even gave them like detailed outlines of the layout of the homes and all of this stuff, and they were able to get these wiretaps. And on these wiretaps, they're talking about all sorts of stuff, illegal things and whatnot. And interestingly, Joseph Pagano was actually caught at one point reminiscing with a friend or something about about trafficking numerous kilos of heroin with Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, who was the Genovese boss before Gigante. And of course, we mentioned him last week in the episode. Fat Tony Salerno, of course, was a good friend of Roy Cohn, and Salerno is the guy who allegedly provided the $125,000 bribe that Roger Stone handed to the New York Liberal Party in order to get John Anderson on the ballot and ultimately splitting the vote and getting Ronald Reagan elected. So, again, not that these are all like, the connections mean something necessarily, but you start to see that these people are all kind of connected. And of course, along with that, there's also just a wealth of other really incriminating evidence that would get both of them in a lot of trouble. Now, that investigation would then end 2 years later in 1989, and it would lead to indictments against 5 Genovese crime family figures. Now, only Daniel, his son, would actually end up in prison. Again, his father would die 2 months before the grand jury indictments. Now, all of the defendants in this, the 5 guys, they all pled guilty. So prosecutors never had to explore or get into some of the allegations that were in the indictment. Now, I bring this up because in the indictment, the New York Attorney Generals, they allege that Daniel Pagano, the son, quote, solicited the use of a bank account of the National Youth Movement to launder money. So now now this is a whole other sort of issue. And again, I think this also illustrates what we spoke about last week in the episode, where all of this sort of weird money and weird financial practices were going on with the national action movement, which is the national youth movement is the predecessor to this. Now, if Daniel Pagano was using a bank account that was completely controlled by Al Sharpton to launder money, that's a pretty serious charge. Yet, surprisingly, Al Sharpton, who again controlled this bank account, is never formally charged, never brought up, and he's never addressed this at all. Now, again, I guess Al Sharpton doesn't have to unless somebody, goes through the smoking gun article and the documents and points it out, but that's a pretty big accusation. And one that I doubt Al Sharpton would have, a good answer for. Now, I guess maybe we'll kind of pause here for a minute because we still have a bit more to get to, but I just kind of want to kind of build this out a little bit. But we have Al Sharpton. We have all of these recordings and whatnot, all of these associations, many of them which are antithetical to his perceived image, and this guy is now on MSNBC. He lectures people all of the time about race relations and about drugs in minority communities and oppressing black people, black artists, all these things, while he was making a career out of doing this himself. Now, perhaps Al Sharpton would, if push came to shove, maybe he would sort of play along with the idea that, well, right, but I was bringing them all down. But he's so cagey about all of this, and he won't admit to anything, so we can only kind of assume that he was sort of okay with this to a large extent. And this is, again, a very different Al Sharpton than we are familiar with nowadays. Just pull up a picture of Al Sharpton back in the 80s, and he, is a very different man than who we see today. But and then again, these investigations would lead to lots more prosecutions, lots of people would be brought down, and interestingly, a lot of these mafia figures still speak highly of Al Sharpton. Which is like really odd, the informants and, rats and stuff like that are never really viewed highly at all by any criminal. You don't have to be in the mafia to dislike a snitch, right? If you're a criminal. But he's surprisingly, kind of viewed not like negatively, but, and I guess not favorably, but sort of like neutrally. And again, it's it would be interesting to see if some of these guys, like if Pagano had actually lived, right, and then went to jail and then found out about this, who knows? But it's interesting to kind of see that Sharpton is not sort of, so looked down upon. Now there's a few more kind of tangents, and other sort of parts to this that we'll explore a bit more in the second hour, but maybe we'll get to a little bit of it right now in the first hour right here. So after the victory tour ends, Don King actually urges Al Sharpton to get into concert promotion. I guess, seeing his value, in terms of shaking people down for money and the boycotts and all that sort of stuff. And Al Sharpton declines, and he says that he wants to travel the uncertain road of civil rights activism. This is the term that he uses all the time. He doesn't want the millions of dollars that would come to him that would, help support his family and all this stuff. Again, he's the, altruistic, wonderful guy who's just doing this for, the good of the nation and for all oppressed people. That's, again, very important in understanding Al Sharpton. It's all about that he's the crusader for, the unsung heroes of America, for the people that have no voice. This is the image that he's created. And it was shortly after again, his work in the Victory Tour and also his work as an FBI informant, that we start to begin to see the changes and the reinvention of Al Sharpton. And he wants to leave the music industry. He doesn't want to have anything to do with this anymore. And he wants to, go about becoming an activist. And this is also sort of around the time that, he sort of, screws himself over with the, Tawana Brawley, case. And myself, I'm not an expert on that. There's some great episodes that, again, Ed Opperman has done on the Brawley case and Al Sharpton's involvement in that. But that kind of sullied him, in terms of his relationship with law enforcement, at least in a public view. And that might have even kind of led to his sort of cutting off ties with the FBI. And I guess at this point, maybe they didn't really need him. And for all intents and purposes, Al Sharpton is now no longer really an FBI agent, at least from documentation that the Smoking Gun and others have been able to dig up. So now we have the sort of reinvented Al Sharpton as the civil rights activist. Now, I guess he had been that to a degree beforehand, but looking at his trajectory, he's the young preacher. Then he's sort of the civil rights activist, but also in the music industry. But now he's going to shed all of that. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the fame. And he's going to ride the uncertain road of civil rights activism. And this is, I think, where is almost even more interesting than the Al Sharpton who's the FBI mafia informant. Because to a degree, you have to kind of say, well, the mafia, for all of these sort of, again, the, Sopranos and whatnot, the mafia is not like a nice organization, really. They do horrible things. It's really funny the way that, so many like rap artists idolize figures in the mafia. And they idolize mafia lingo and mafia culture. And of course it's the mafia, that was the one that was ripping off all these black artists. It's the mafia that was selling heroin and cocaine to all of these black artists and to black communities. So it's very odd, and perhaps maybe Al Sharpton, wanted to kind of shed that image. I don't know, but so now we start to see the evolution. We start to see the new Al Sharpton, and Sharpton's activism would continue on with his friend Robert Curington. And it was actually Al Sharpton and Curington that would help Senator Al D'Amato get the endorsement of several prominent black ministers when he was running against the liberal Democrat Mark Green. And I think I briefly mentioned that in last week's episode. But Al D'Amato, very nasty Republican senator. Who's a total shill, will do anything for a buck, and not a nice person, and it was basically, again, running against a liberal, and now we have Al Sharpton, supporting the, sort of more right-wing Republican. And what's important about Sharpton and Curington getting these black ministers to endorse, Al D'Amato is that D'Amato had just, a few months ago referred to residents of housing projects as, quote, animals. So very odd that Sharpton would be supporting this guy. Now, Al D'Amato, of course, won very handedly, and he would actually, when he won, he would allocate a $500,000 federal grant to Al Sharpton and Robert Curington to establish an anti-drug program in Brooklyn. So again, at this point, Curington has already been convicted of heroin trafficking, and now he's going to be named the executive director of this anti-drug program in Brooklyn, which is getting $500,000 from the federal government. Well, we'll continue this in the second hour. I know I threw a lot out at you, but sit on that, and I'll be talking to you very soon.
I like very much radio. You're an American institution. American Freedom Radio.
Are you feeling embarrassed and stuck because you can't focus or concentrate? I have a confession to make. I spent years unable to think clearly, like I was in a fog. I was going through the motion, running my companies, and I hated feeling groggy and mentally sluggish. I couldn't get ahead like this. It's no secret the powers that be want us dumbed down. Chemicals, fluoride, our brains are under siege, and we are experiencing lower IQs. But now there's a weapon to fight back and win. Introducing DNA Evolve, a revolutionary breakthrough in a category of cognitive enhancers called nootropics. I've been using DNA Evolve and couldn't feel better. For me, it works. It feels great to get things done again and get ahead. Try a free sample for yourself at DNAEvolveSample.com. That's DNAEvolveSample.com. Supplies are limited, so go to DNAEvolveSample.com right now.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of micro plant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media, not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us for free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scam.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today. No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City. Your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. If you're just joining us right now, this episode I have been talking all about Al Sharpton, the FBI informant, his time as an FBI informant, informing on mafioso figures. And just towards the end of the first hour, we were sort of getting into the transitional phase. And we're talking sort of, after these sort of big indictments against several prominent figures, this is sort of a takedown of the Genovese crime family and Gambinos and others and stuff like that, and talking about Sharpton's transition to the trailblazing liberal do-gooder civil rights activist. And I was talking about his help with Al D'Amato, the racist Republican senator, and I mentioned that when Al D'Amato won, and he certainly got quite a bit of help from Al Sharpton. And if you don't believe that, as I said, D'Amato allocated this $500 federal grant to Sharpton and his friend Robert Curington to establish this anti-drug program in Brooklyn. And I said Curington, who was a convicted drug dealer, was going to be the executive director. And they were also planning on getting $750,000 in corporate support from 8 different record labels. Now, ultimately, this federal grant, this program, would never happen. When the government found out that they were going to be running this drug program out of a church, they got cold feet, and the grant application was canceled. But again, it's very significant. And Al Sharpton was also the guy who, at Al D'Amato's request, convinced Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's wife, to attend the Republican National Convention. And there's this awkward moment where Barbara Bush comes up and shakes her hand and gives her a kiss. And so, very powerful political theater. And this is the new battlefield that Al Sharpton is getting into. Very interestingly, Sharpton never mentions D'Amato's $6-figure loan in any of his books, and he denies having ever asked for public funding for anything, because he doesn't want to have any strings attached. He doesn't want to have any conflict of interest. But so, again, very interesting that he denies basically getting what would amount to a payoff, I would assume, from Al D'Amato. Now, I mentioned before the Sugar Hill Records label, which was, partly owned by Morris Levy and some other mafia figures as well. And there's another sort of side to all of that, which I think again is really interesting, given Al Sharpton's supposed promotion of black music legends and whatnot. Now, in 1987, Curington and Sharpton were involved in a multi-million-dollar deal between Sugar Hill Records and MCA Records in Los Angeles. Now, and so they Sharpton and Curington put money into this. It was going to be this huge deal. Now, the owner at the time of Sugar Hill Records, Joe Robinson, was in a lot of financial trouble, and a lot of his financial trouble resulted in him back in the day taking money from various mafia figures that wanted to get in rap music. So again, that weird sort of you have so many rap artists emulating mafia culture, while again it is the mafia that is making money off of them and basically stealing a lot of it from them, and at least controlling them as well. So, very, very interesting sort of mindset to have in mind. Now, when the deal between Sugar Hill and MCA breaks down, Joe Robinson starts getting harassed very frequently by some, very scary Italian gentlemen. At one point, Bonanno himself would pay a visit to Sugar Hill Records an attempt to get the money that Robinson owed Sharpton and Curington. And it was, it wasn't just Bonanno too. There's lots of other guys, would show up and they would harass Robinson. They would threaten Robinson. At one point, Robert Curington himself was down there harassing him, and he actually punched one of Robinson's sons and was arrested. And when he was arrested, he identified himself as the vice president of Sharpton's National Youth Movement. Now, Sharpton himself would also go down there to the studio to collect money. So, again, maybe I'm reiterating myself. Maybe I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but this is supposed to be this man, Al Sharpton, is supposed to be the guy that's preventing this sort of stuff from happening. Yet he is up to his eyeballs in all of this. I mean, he is beyond a hypocrite, in my opinion. And again, too, I mean, he's talking about getting drugs out, cleaning up the music industry, when all he can do is associate himself with all of these sort of people. And just a quick kind of note on Sharpton and his connections to the music industry, drugs, and his own celebrity. So Sharpton got a deal with MSNBC in 2011. A few years before that, 2009, Al Sharpton and convicted cocaine trafficker and hip-hop manager James "Jimmy the Henchman" Rosemond attempted to get Al Sharpton a Judge Judy style talk show. So, Al Sharpton would be, a fake judge presiding over, God only knows what, the sort of lame ass shit that Judge Judy and, Mathis Brown, all these other guys do. Which would, I think would probably be a better role for Al. I would much prefer if Al Sharpton just sort of stayed in entertainment, and if he had a judge show, I would definitely watch that. I mean, I'm sure it would be hilarious. But, and just say, James Rosemond wasn't just a cocaine trafficker. He was head of a massive cocaine ring in California. So again, this crusader against all of these things can't seem to shake all of these nefarious friends of his. He continues to surround himself with all these people. Now, let's move on to another part of Sharpton's informant career, because for right now, what is Sharpton doing? He is basically informing on bad guys. For all of the talk about how, cool and wonderful the Mafia is, they are essentially, they are breaking the law. They're doing horrible things, killing people, extorting people, drugs, prostitution, loan sharking, all of these sort of things. So we can kind of say, well, whatever. Maybe, maybe we can make the case that Sharpton is okay, even though I wouldn't. But the smoking gun investigation led very prominent black activist and black revolutionary leader Ahmed Obafemi to recall a very unusual meeting that he had with Al Sharpton back in 1983. And he remembered this meeting very well because Sharpton was acting very strange, and he remembered how Sharpton paid unusual attention to the briefcase that he was carrying, that he kept very close to himself, in between him and Obafemi. And this made Obafemi very uncomfortable. At that time, there was, a lot of, Black Panthers, Black revolutionaries, activists were on the run. Obafemi and his friends were rightfully paranoid about informants and infiltrators into their groups. And I think he said that I'll link it up. It's in a Daily News article. But he said I think he met 2 times, and one time with the briefcase. And he said it was very odd. Sharpton wouldn't constantly kept his eyes on the briefcase. He talked about the way that Sharpton positioned the briefcase. He thought maybe there was a camera or a microphone in there. And he said that he was, totally vindicated when the smoking gun stuff came out. And he said was even stranger was Al Sharpton's attempts at trying to find fugitive Black Panther Assata Shakur, who at that point was on the run. She'd broken out of jail. She now lives in Cuba, under Fidel Castro granted her political asylum. And at some point, Al Sharpton ran into New York photographer and activist Kwame Brathwaite. And Brathwaite said that Al Sharpton offered to give Assata Shakur $50,000 if she could be located. And for anyone that doesn't know, Assata Shakur is the aunt of Tupac Shakur, very famous Black Panther. Tupac, of course, is like Black Panther royalty. So, his mother, father, his aunts and uncles are all very prominent Black activists, which is ultimately what led Tupac to being murdered. But that's definitely another podcast or a radio show there. So what is that? That is Al Sharpton also informing on other Black activists. Again, this is supposed to be the liberal crusader, the guy who is going down the unknown road of activism and trying to help all these people. And again, 1983, this is just when he is at least officially flipped by the FBI. And now he's meeting with very prominent people in the underground. So what's that about, And it makes sense. I think that, again, this is why Al Sharpton, or, Confidential Informant 7 was so sought after. I mentioned early on in the first hour that he was shopped around by his handler Spinelli, and that is true. Anytime there was somebody needed some information, or they needed somebody that could sign off on an affidavit saying that yes, at this particular restaurant or this social club or this house, business, mafia business, organized crime business is discussed, they would all go to Al Sharpton. And presumably Al Sharpton had, he may not have had connections to the Black Panthers in any tangible way, but he certainly would have been able to solicit that information if he wanted to, as evidenced by his meetings with Obafemi and also with Brathwaite. So now again, we also have the and I think this is in many ways is maybe more nefarious in that, now Sharpton is really kind of just putting the cards on the table. It's bad enough that he hangs out with all these figures, who are oppressing Black people, but now he's also, trying to solicit information, from actual activists, true people who are truly concerned, with the plight of people with no voice. So very, very interesting. And again, this would have never come out had the Smoking Gun not did this big investigation into his work as a mafia informant. Now, I guess presumably we could probably get a FOIA request and see if there's anything to Obafemi's claims. There should be a paper trail. There should be something that identifies. It may not identify him as Confidential Informant 7. It may not. And this is also very important. I forgot to mention early on. The FBI did everything that they could to hide who CI7 was. The specificity with which CI7 talks about events and whatnot in these affidavits, if these cases ever go to trial and defense counsel, they have the right to all of these affidavits, to wiretaps and whatnot, it would take them about 2 seconds to figure out that they were talking about that it was Al Sharpton. There's no way around this. And the Smoking Gun links up in their documents. They link up a draft FBI affidavit, which again very clearly lays out that CI7 is Al Sharpton. And again, this is just by the nature of the what was talked about in the conversations, the location, all that sort of stuff. And the FBI would actually go back and they would rewrite the affidavits to hide who Al Sharpton was, to hide who CI7 was, to hide any, any specific things that would lead people to seeing that he was walking around with a briefcase that was wired up. So the briefcase is never mentioned. In one of the affidavits, some Gambino wise guy that he's talking to, that name is deleted. Again, all mentions of the briefcase are deleted. So again, this was a very, this wasn't your run-of-the-mill informant. This was someone that was well protected within the FBI. So, something to definitely keep in mind. So again, even if we, were able to get these, FOIA requests, it might be difficult to, ascertain exactly, who the informant was. Now, also on this sort of note, again, of Al Sharpton informing on leftist groups and things like that, a good friend of the radio show, Ed Opperman, has spoken about his experiences with Al Sharpton. And when Ed was younger, and he was with the Yippies, he met Sharpton at Rock Against Racism, which was a Yippie event. And then he later met Al Sharpton at a planning meeting with Black Vets for Social Justice. He also met him at an event held by Reverend Herbert Doherty. I'm sure I'm butchering that, Ed. I'm sorry. And I actually spoke with Ed the other night, and Ed said that this was the first time that he met him was sometime after 1979. And the last time that he saw him was, I believe it was sometime before 1985. So, in theory, he had to have been an informant before 1983. And this is what Ed believes, that there's no way that he was flipped, in that the FBI sting with the coke and whatnot. That he might have been flipped even before that, or he might have been, they might have been leaning on him. And again, who really knows what's in that FBI, video? Now I know, that's what we're all presented with. And this is sort of a, tinfoil, theory. But I mean, what if it was the other way around? What if it was Sharpton, who was setting up that guy? What proof do we have that this FBI agent, this alleged FBI agent was the undercover officer? I mean, I don't know if that guy's ever going to come out, I mean, these sort of guys, their identity is hidden. So Ed believes that Sharpton was informing on him. And again, I think it would make sense. Or at the very least, that's another avenue. Yippies were fairly radical. I believe, Abby Hoffman was on the run. These were not, your sort of garden variety, white liberal activists. And Sharpton is hanging out there. Now also, Ed, and I think Ed has also, spoken about this before on his show. He met Al Sharpton again sometime around 1982, when he was working, for a PI firm that did almost exclusively organized crime defense. So, this was a PI firm you would go to if you were an organized crime figure. Al Sharpton came into that office around 1982 and recognized Ed and was carrying his briefcase. Again, he wasn't just going in there to, shoot the shit and hang out. There had to be more to that. What was he doing in that sort of PI office? What was he doing carrying the briefcase? So there is some evidence, as I said early on, that Sharpton might have been flipped or might have been working as an informant sometime before the official 1983 flipping, when he's busted for the cocaine charges. And again, this may not be like he was a full-on, FBI informant. He could have been like I said, he could be the sort of low-level informant, just giving little bits and pieces of information here and there. But again, I hope I've sort of illustrated this to all of you, that This is a guy who, from at least the mid to late 70s, was involved with mafioso figures. We go all the way back to his time when he was working at Spring Records. He was at least involved in some sort of mafia-run scheme with Con Ed. And again, he's hanging out with all of these characters. I mean, it wasn't back in those days. It wasn't unusual for mafioso to come into the recording studios, to come into the record companies. So he was around all of these people. So it's either he was an informant for much longer, or maybe even worse, he's cooperating with these guys. He has no problem gypping black artists, with hanging out with people that are selling black communities drugs, all these sort of things. So, keep all of that in mind. And again, even as late as 2009, Sharpton is hanging out with a convicted cocaine trafficker trying to get a Judge Judy style talk show. So, very interesting, I think, sort of a portrait that is being painted here. And I've mentioned a couple times in this episode some Sopranos references. So we have just to recap, we have Vincent Gigante, who pretended to be mentally ill, which is what Uncle June does at one point. We have Morris Levy, who was the inspiration for Hesh on the show. But I think an even more important reference to the Sopranos, and really does that, the writers of the Sopranos very much understand the mafia world, understand the structure of the mafia, but also really understand the history of the mafia. Now, if we understand the history of the mafia, we understand that the mob has long been involved in the construction business, with construction sites, with cement companies, things of that nature. And this is just a reality. Now, what was Al Sharpton doing, before a lot of before the Victory Tour and all this other stuff? He used to picket and protest construction sites that were definitely owned or run by the mafia. There is an entire episode of The Sopranos where a black activist and his minister father are protesting a construction site for not hiring black workers. And what happens at the end of that episode? Oh, well, we find out that the young, charismatic son, who's the activist, is on Tony's payroll. The Tony is paying him off and, protecting him from getting beat up or anything like that when these Goombas come to rough up the black workers. But I have there's no evidence that that the writers of the episode knew about Al Sharpton or anything like that. But again, I think it's the reason that it's a very odd sort of parallel to the Al Sharpton that we all know and love. Now, quickly, going back to this 60 Minutes profile back in 2011, and I spoke about that earlier. At the end of the profile, Wayne Barrett is interviewed. And, of course, the great Wayne Barrett of The Village Voice, he has been writing about Al Sharpton, way before it was in vogue to do so, and had always sort of chronicled him. He, of course, has been chronicling Roger Stone and his involvement in New York City politics. And Wayne Barrett says in the end of the 60 Minutes profile that Sharpton was in the civil rights business. I don't think he's a civil rights leader. And considering his past, he says, quote, would anyone else be able to transcend that and be this larger-than-life figure? And Leslie Saul says he has. And Barrett responds, only because we let him. And I think it's a very powerful statement by Wayne Barrett, who doesn't buy any of this phony BS about him being the civil rights activist. And only because we let him. And that's very important, because for all of Al Sharpton's awful connections, the unsavory characters that he associates with, all of these things are that's one aspect of this, but we have allowed him to rise up to this level. And I'm not saying like, you know, we as in like the listeners of the show or people that are into the alt media and things like that. Obviously, you know, if you're listening to this, you probably have some, you know, you don't buy it. But he's not been held accountable. He's not ever been confronted with this stuff. He has been able to maintain this facade that he is this wonderful person who does everything, you know, out of benevolence. And he has now risen to a very prominent and powerful role in the media and in society. He's now extremely wealthy. You know, God only knows how much money he makes through the MSNBC deal, not to mention all of the weird financial stuff that's probably going on with the National Action Movement. But speaking events, all of these sort of things. And what is Sharpton become now? What is this new reinvention of Sharpton? Aside from the sort of the veneer of the civil rights activist, what does Sharpton do now? Well, now every time a black man is killed, by a police officer or whatnot, Al Sharpton flies out there immediately. He infiltrates that family and he controls the narrative. The family doesn't do the press conference. Al Sharpton does the press conference while they stand behind him. Al Sharpton controls the media narrative of so many of these police shootings and crime against the black community. Now, I guess Al Sharpton has sort of stayed away from that a little bit recently, only because he's gotten, you know, some pushback. But throughout the 90s, early 2000s, and even now still, he is the person that becomes the face of the oppression of black people in America. This man who is a mafia associate, or who was a mafia associate, who was a FBI informer, who informed on black leftist groups, who made money off of the music industry, off of made money with drug dealers and drug traffickers. So he is, you know, again, antithetical to everything that he believes he stands for. And what's happening right now? We see, Black Lives Matter definitely is being manipulated and controlled by the feds. I'm sure they've got all sorts of informants in there right now. You know, what do you think when we see Black Lives Matter activists going to the White House? That's it. You know, now, and I think Al Sharpton in many ways kind of paved the way for that to happen. Now, maybe back then it took Al Sharpton getting caught selling coke or something in order to get that. But now we don't even have to do that. Now it seems much, much easier for the government to take these groups which have real grievances, no matter what you want to say that, it's all a, Zionist plot or George Soros or all that kind of BS. No, they do have legitimate gripes that need to be addressed. And now what's happening? Absolutely nothing. They've now aligned themselves in many ways with the government, which is really has they don't care. They're not out to actually, fix things or anything like that. And what have the police done? Nothing. The police aren't even doing token sort of like PR stunts to make it seem like they care about the black community. They're not even willing to do that. I'll read you some quotes right here, which I think are very interesting. One of them was from Tony West, and who was at one point was like the third in command at the Department of Justice, and he was speaking some event where Al Sharpton was there. And he said, he praised him for his leadership day in, day out on issues of reconciliation and community restoration. And another point, Eric Holder, speaking at a National Action Network meeting, thanked Al Sharpton, quote, for your partnership, your friendship, also for your tireless efforts to speak out for voiceless, to stand up for the powerful, and to shine a light on the problems we must solve and the promises we must fulfill. Well, what problems has Al Sharpton solved? Absolutely nothing. Talking about your partnership, is that a nod to his time as an FBI informant? So I think the bigger picture here is that so much of Al Sharpton's career as a media personality, as a so-called civil rights activist, all this stuff, goes back in so many ways to his time as an FBI informant. This allowed him to make money. This allowed him to make influential friends. And this seems, on some level, to have allowed him a safety net. No one is going to turn on him now. I'm sure he was protected after, and who knows if he's still an informant. My bet is that he definitely has a lot of these contacts still. And, I would be very nervous if I were a activist and if Al Sharpton ever showed up. Al Sharpton, again, has ingratiated himself to Black Lives Matter, to other protest groups, to other activist organizations, and I assume that this is on some level about recruitment, about getting other people to become potential informants. So, anytime you see Al Sharpton cozying up to these groups, be very curious about it. Because, his history is pretty murky at best. And again, nobody is calling out the Rev Al on any of this right now. I agree with Wayne Barrett. We've let him rise to this level of power and influence. We've allowed him to constantly reinvent himself. So no more, he's no longer the chubby, long-haired guy in sweatsuits and gold chains. Now he's the thin, bobblehead version in expensive tailored suits. And he's not the only one, but he's a great example of what can happen when we become indifferent, when we become complacent about ever kind of speaking our mind and voicing what is wrong with these people. At this point now, he's sort of untouchable. And what does he become? He's now the attack dog. He's always attacking the Republicans. He's he's the voice of reason. He's, his opinion matters more than anyone else when it comes to police violence, to drugs in the community, to race relations, all this sort of stuff. And again, how much of this is being manipulated and orchestrated by the government? I don't know. There's no metric for us to measure this by, but I would, caution or err on the side that this is still going on. I hope I haven't bored everybody with all of my talk about Al Sharpton. I really do despise him. I think he's anyone that's lived in New York long enough will know how irritating he is, and especially the way that he manipulates people that have really suffered trauma. Because and let's face it too. I mean, Al Sharpton is living the high life right now. Google his new wife, who's young enough to be his daughter. He's enjoying himself, and he's made a killing, figuratively and possibly literally, out of his experiences with some of the nastiest people that you can associate yourself with. So, I guess Rev Al, if you're listening to this, screw you, but I'd love to have you on the show if you ever want to talk about your days in the FBI. But anyway, I guess we'll leave it there. Once again, I have rambled on for almost 2 hours, but now we've got this awkward moment right here where we've got maybe 15 or 20 minutes left that I've got to fill. So I will say that the Patreon subscriber only podcast has been posted. So if you'd like to hear that podcast, if you'd like to hear more of the subscriber only podcast, then definitely become a patron of mine on Patreon. The subscriber only podcast is available to people who donate at the $5 level. And interesting, it was a fun podcast to do. I talked a little bit about a writing project that I'm involved with. Also spoke about a former project that I'm no longer involved with that shall remain nameless. And some of my issues with that. So if you're interested in any of that, if you're also interested in some upcoming episodes, getting a little bit of info on that, then definitely become a subscriber on Patreon and listen to that. I will be putting out the Patreon episodes a little bit faster. I know it took a friggin' eternity for me to get this up, but I will be recording another one soon, so you can look out for that. Also, Christoph Gehrman and I, my good friend and co-host of Porkins Great Game, we are finally returning to that show as well. So we're going to be recording this Thursday. I'm hoping to get it up by Friday, but more likely Saturday morning. We'll have that episode up, and we will be picking that up again, doing the monthly show, and hopefully we'll be doing a few more shows. But I know there's a lot of people out there that have been hounding me about getting that show back up and running, and we will be. So and of course you can also subscribe on Patreon to that show as well. And Christoph and I will be working on what the subscriber only podcast for that. So we do have a few people that have donated at the $10 level. So we'll also have a special bonus podcast for you as well. And Christoph and I have some plans to kind of, ideas for expanding the show and possibly doing, more than just the once a month. But that will be back. Lot of stuff. We're going to be covering the recent elections in Georgia. We're going to be talking about the goings on in Afghanistan. We've got this peace deal that has been put in place between Gulbuddin Hekmatar and his group Hezbi Islami and the government in Afghanistan. The Taliban continues to wreak havoc all over. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to talk about the what else are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about this crazy German terror plot. Lots of stuff. Really, really interesting stuff. We're also going to talk, of course, about the recent death of Uzbek leader Karimov, which is a huge deal in Central Asia. So lots to look forward to on that avenue. And God, what else do we have? I feel like Ed Opperman when he's always saying, oh boy, he doesn't know what else to talk about. I guess we can talk, I swear I've been at my wit's end with this election. And I guess, we'll get a little personal right now. But, I see a therapist. And I was recently just talking with him about this sort of psychological trauma of this election, and particularly in light of the fact that I have to, or I guess I don't have to cover it on the show, but I end up covering it. And if you're in the media, even if it's alternative media, you do have to kind of follow this stuff, and it's really painful, and it's become so nasty and sort of toxic that it's actually kind of made me depressed. And this recent round with Anthony Weiner, who is, the definition of a bad penny, I've just sort of given up. I don't care anymore. I'm almost at the point where if, the military came in and overthrew the government, that might make me even more happy. At least we wouldn't have to hear about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump anymore. Of course, anyone looking at the calendar will know that next Tuesday is Election Day. So I will be I guess I'll have to cover it, in some capacity. I was thinking maybe we'll try and get, maybe a couple different guests, some people that we've had on the show before, and get their reactions, maybe who they're voting for, how they feel about the election. I'd love to hear from the listeners out there. So if you want to call into the show, we can always set that up. If you want to send me some emails or questions you'd like me to answer, on election day, if you want to tweet me, during the show, we can talk about your thoughts or, how you're feeling. Cause I think a lot of people are kind of feeling that malaise, setting. And now as we're in the final stages, 7 days to go, I think people are really also at their wits' end. This election in particular has just been so draining. It's like sometimes after I do these shows, even like the Roger Stone one was, that was sort of like my last stand in terms of the election. And I promise, after whoever wins, even though, whoever wins, we're still going to have to talk about, or we're still going to have to hear about it, but you won't be hearing about it on my show. Undoubtedly I'll still be covering Epstein, and we've got the Trump lawsuit, with the allegations of raping a 13-year-old girl along with Epstein. I will be covering that, but I'm not going to be covering any more of this, prattle coming out of these two lunatics' mouths. And again, I don't even think this latest Wienergate fiasco even means anything. I mean, who at this point is undecided? Who at this point is, Anthony Weiner might have had access to classified emails. Oh, I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Now I have to vote for Donald Trump. I mean, those people don't exist. That's what's so sort of ridiculous. Like the sort of knee-jerk response that came out of all the, Trump cultists, that, great, they're opening up the election, this is it, blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's your October surprise. It's not WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, who are actually putting out some pretty damaging information. No, that's not the October surprise. The October surprise is this disgusting pervert, Anthony Weiner, who, I don't know what Huma Abedin was ever doing, marrying this nut job. But she did. And let's not forget too, what's Weiner being accused of right now? Oh, well, it's sexting with a 15-year-old girl. I mean, and nobody cares about that, that's, who cares? It's that he might have, seen classified information. I mean, the story is so vague, even now. I mean, so what? Anthony Weiner, so on Anthony Weiner's computer, which I'm sure, Huma Abedin wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, that somehow might have emails pertinent to the investigation. I mean, it sees like such sort of smoke and mirrors right now. It's interesting, Rush Limbaugh was, harping on that, the Weiner thing is actually, that's the sort of false flag, so to speak, that the Clintons are putting out there, because that deflects from WikiLeaks. And I don't know, maybe Rush is right about that. I hate to ever, commend him or agree with him, but maybe that is true. I don't know. I mean, because now it's just all Weiner all the time. And then you also have these like weird comments from Trump and Trump supporters, say, oh yeah, thank God for Anthony Weiner, and never thought I would ever like something he did. And it's like, do you not care that he was, essentially preying on a 15-year-old girl? And if you read that Daily Mail article that sort of broke that story, I believe the girl in question says that during some of the Skype video conversations that she took her clothes off. I might be wrong about that. I have to check that again, but I'm pretty sure she's, they were doing stuff on Skype video messaging. So, I mean, now we're talking about child pornography. And that is almost like nobody even cares about that, I mean, I could almost even see if this really becomes like an actual story or legal case or something. I can see Anthony Weiner, pleading out or something, copping to lesser charges in exchange for information about what, oh yeah, the Huma used my computer and these emails were there, and he gets out scot-free. Probably to, go back to trolling the internet, looking for, women and young girls to, I don't know what is up with him. I mean, he is he's also just so lame. Really is like, Anthony, there are escort services. There are dating websites. I mean, he could go out there. I mean, I'm sure there are, there are women out there that would probably be into Anthony Weiner. Yet he can only maintain these like cyber relationships, which is like it's a real metaphor or analogy for, the way our culture has sort of, digressed. It's like that's now like, we're always hearing these cyber warriors and, everything now is, I just saw a commercial the other day. It was trying to make the, like Army's, cyber, anti-cyber terrorism unit look super cool. And it's all these fast-paced cuts and stuff of people, they're, reverse hacking the Russians and stuff like that. And it's like, there's really no way to make hacking look cool, like in a visual sense. It's really just typing and clicking. It's not that exciting. But like that's the battlefield. And it's sort of like, what is that the battlefield that we're going to see in terms of like all sex scandals now are going to be like cyber, because that's like the only way that people seem to be able to communicate with one another. I mean, apparently Anthony Weiner is incapable of actually approaching a woman in public. He can't and he seems addicted not to sex, but to sexting, to sending lewd pictures, to possibly getting lewd pictures. But it seems like he would never really act on that. I mean, maybe he would, maybe he has. I do not want to know. The less said about Anthony Weiner, the better. But is that the new frontier of political sex scandal? And we've begun to kind of see that happening more and more. But Weiner is just, he takes it to a whole other level. And don't buy into any of this BS or, Trump is so prescient and was, predicted this long ago. I mean, it really does. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to have predicted that Anthony Weiner was a liability. He was a liability the first time, he got caught, and he was a liability, the second time and the third time and the fourth time, and, he was a liability this last time. So don't buy in any of this crap that, Trump knew and whatnot. And, essentially, I don't see how, again, Anthony Weiner sexting with a 15-year-old, versus all of Trump's behavior, all of, Epstein, this, rape allegation right now. It's all a bunch of BS. And I frankly am just so over it. I can't even be bothered anymore. I don't care. I genuinely wake up and, I turn on the radio or news or I check, what's going on Twitter or stuff. And it's just this constant stream of toxic bullshit from all sides. And it really is just, it's like never ending. I think maybe that, that seems to be one of the points of this election is how angry, how can we make the public just hate one another and carry this hate all of the time? I think, that's going to be the legacy of this. And of course, the bar has now been so lowered, that, I mean, God only knows what 4 years from now, but 8 years from now, when it's a total free-for-all, we really are going to see Kanye West running for president as he's, announced. And, who's going to run against him? Someone even lower than him. Lower than Donald Trump. I mean, again, with, Wayne Barrett and his quote that we let him, in terms of Al Sharpton, I think we're letting we're doing this again. We're doing this now on a national level, where we are letting these psychopaths, and these just reprehensible, disgusting human beings, we're allowing them the opportunity to become the norm. We are allowing them to become the new standard. So now, at this point, a scandal is going to mean nothing, because apparently you can have two candidates running for the so-called highest office in America, full of scandals. Every other day there's a scandal. So, war crimes, sexual assault, pedophilia, drug trafficking, all these sort of things. These can all happen on an almost daily basis, and we don't seem to care. It no longer phases us. Why? Because we've allowed them to. We have let them gain this power. We've let them become socially and culturally acceptable to us. That now, I mean, to pray that the next election is like a reality show is just, it's not even possible anymore. We've allowed our nation to become a reality show. We've allowed for the worst aspects of celebrity culture, the worst aspects of power and influence and money become so ingrained that, I mean, who cares about a sex scandal? Who cares, about a sex scandal involving children anymore? I mean, that's where we're at right now, where it no longer matters to us. As long as our, guy or gal, they win. It's all, that's all that really matters. And that's a really, I don't know, that's sort of a pessimistic way to kind of wrap up this show. But as I said, I've been sort of in a pessimistic mood the past couple of weeks, and it's just sort of hard to shake, and it's hard to, it really is getting to the point where it's like hard to wake up and just sort of face the day, when we've so much negativity out there, and again, that, on like a psychic or whatever spiritual level, I mean, you carry that kind of negativity, and that goes into everything you do. That translates negatively to everything, to your interactions with people, to the food that you make. You're putting that into everything, and it's just going to rot you from the inside out. And maybe that's the whole point of this. Maybe that's the whole point of these figures like Al Sharpton, Anthony Weiner, Donald Trump, Roger Stone, Bill Clinton, is just to make us accept it and to then just bury it within ourselves until it just sort of destroys us from the inside out. And when you're in that kind of a state, you will accept anything from a reality star or, Kanye West running for president to another war in the Middle East to, anything. Well, anyway, thank you all for joining me. Next week we will be, unfortunately covering the election, but maybe we won't. Maybe we'll do something different. But anyway, thank you all, and I'll be talking to you soon.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
Are you feeling embarrassed and stuck because you can't focus or concentrate? I have a confession to make. I spent years unable to think clearly, like I was in a fog. I was going through the motions, running my companies, and I hated feeling groggy and mentally sluggish. I couldn't get ahead like this. It's no secret, the powers that be want us dumbed down. Chemicals, fluoride, our brains are under siege, and we are experiencing lower IQs. But now there's a weapon to fight back and win. Introducing DNA Evolve, a revolutionary breakthrough in a category of cognitive enhancers called nootropics. I've been using DNA Evolve and couldn't feel better. For me, it works. It feels great to get things done again and get ahead. Try a free sample for yourself at DNAEvolveSample.com. That's DNAEvolveSample.com. Supplies are limited, so go to DNAEvolveSample.com right now.
Nutritious food is real body armor. It builds muscle, burns fat, improves digestion, and feeds the entire body the nutrients it needs. Did you know the U.S. government banned the hemp plant from growing in the United States and classified it as a Schedule I drug to hide it behind the marijuana plant? People have been confused about this plant for over 80 years, and many still don't know what hemp is. So now you know hemp is not marijuana, and marijuana is not hemp. They are different varieties of the same species. HempUSA.org wants the world to know these basic facts and to help people understand that hemp protein powder is the best kept health secret you need to know about. Remember, hemp protein powder contains 53% protein, is gluten-free, anti-inflammatory, non-GMO, and is loaded with nutrients. Call 888-910-4367, 888-910-4367, and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.